Albums are the lifeblood of the music industry. There is absolutely no doubt about that. So much so that entire websites, podcasts, award shows, and, well, even some YouTube channels entirely exist to talk about, rate, review, debate on, and, well, talk about the best albums. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. When it comes to EDM in specific, though, albums aren't really the primary format that drives the scene forward like it does for other genres. I think that's largely in part to the prominence of EPs within the EDM and dance spheres, but more so than anything because, in full honesty, it's hard to make an EDM album. Typically, albums are made to convey some form of longer narrative, and while it's not imperative that a record has a fleshed out storyline, it's often underwhelming if there isn't at least a little something. Furthermore, EDM in specific is designed to be, for the most part, repetitive. That middle letter D stands for dance, and it's a lot easier to dance to a song where you aren't necessarily surprised by what's coming next. That being said, EDM as a whole has evolved so much over the past couple decades into more than just a simple four-on-the-floor beat and linear song structure. EDM and EDM adjacent genres have blossomed into some new territory that was pretty unthinkable just 20 years ago. And that's honestly the big reason I love it. The umbrella term EDM covers so much ground nowadays that it truly is one of the biggest genres in music. So without any further ado, let's hop into what I believe to be the top 10 EDM albums of 2024. When it came to my prior list of best EPs of the year, I was very openly glazing the sounds, styles, and artists of UK garage music. There was something so inherently modern, yet so uniquely danceable about garage music that always had a grip on me. So because my number one EP of the year was garage, I thought we'd just keep things going for now. MPH might actually be the newest wave of UK garage. Melding together the core sounds of garage with the heavier bassline elements of bass house, MPH has crafted a soundscape that is truly his own. The beats are infectious, the vocal chops are hooky as hell, and the whole tracklist has enough diversity to keep me coming back for more. This is a modern EDM record through and through. Very much electronic and hella danceable. Honestly, this might just be the best album to get up and dance to of this entire list. As someone that lives in Canada, I honestly have a bit of FOMO for the current state of dance music all throughout Europe right now. Whether it's the house and trance-ish movements of Germany or the frequency of clubs banging garage tunes in the UK. I can't help but feel jealous for the easy access and commonality of finding records like these in your daily life.
Not them. On a late one, doing up shisha. Sometimes Starboys get a breather. It's about 15 for the feature. I'm a rider.
As I mentioned, I think what truly puts this album on this list for me is the unique blending of UK garage and bass house elements. I'm quite frankly not sure if MPH is the pioneer of this specific sound, but he might as well be the frontrunner for it right now. I love the beautiful clashing of light drum kit work, and then just the heaviest, most dense bass lines hits you'll hear all year. Mixing in a smattering of hip-hop features and funky rhythms, Refraction is a record that does a lot of things at the same time, yet none of it feels out of place. And as someone that hadn't heard of MPH before this record, this is without a doubt the greatest first listening experience I had to an album this year. Whether or not it's intentional, if you know an artist and or have heard the singles on a project released prior to the whole album, you will have a certain bias running through your mind. So it's a real treat to have a completely fresh set of ears on a record that is genuinely one of the best that the year has to offer. There will always be artists in any creative space that truly embody the sense of quality over quantity. If an artist's debut record is one that reaches critical reception and cult-level fame, it's so incredibly tempting to ride the wave of that success and pump out project after project immediately following. And I get it. One could easily set themselves up for life in terms of monetary gain by employing such a strategy. So when an artist intentionally holds off for almost a decade to make sure their next solo project is truly some of their best work, you have to give them credit for it. As the primary producer for the XX, Jamie, Rami, and Oliver released 2 records together before Jamie ventured into solo territory with 2015's In Color. Hailed almost immediately as one of the greatest UK bass records, In Color has a mixture of wonky sound design, complex instrumentation, and incredible mix quality. But it would take 9 more years until we got Jamie XX's sophomore solo album with In Waves, which saw just as much critical reception as the first. Embracing a more house-centric and not as much UK-based focused record than the first, In Waves is a substantially more commercially friendly record than its predecessor. Still keeping his signature drum work, garage beats, and clean mixing, this record was a very natural progression of Jamie's sound. This record is slower and has a bit more of a moodier aesthetic to it, while still keeping his signature sound very much at the forefront. The singles were all absolutely stellar, while the non-singles acted more as like supporting cast members. Top to bottom though, just absolute bliss. Some of the best moments of this record come from a slew of standout features that are spread across just over half of the tracklist. From Panda Bear, Robin, The Avalanches, and yes, still Rami and Oliver, this album really felt like Jamie was just having an absolute blast every step of the way during both the writing and production processes. And I do think that it has a sense of fun, cheery, easygoing energy that easily shines through on that finished project. You can really tell he loved this thing. Jamie XX had already cemented himself as one of the elite level producers in EDM with his work on the XX and his debut album. But with the release of In Waves, it's hard to argue that he's not a top 5 all time now. His creativity, sound design, variance in genre, and longevity is hard to argue against. Well, it seems like 2024 was the year for returns after an almost decade-long hiatus. Pretty much everything that I prefaced about Jamie XX's In Waves applies to this next entrant too. An iconic 2015 album after a 2014 debut, but this time the break was truly a hiatus in nature. While Jamie XX worked on a couple of other projects here and there, this next guy was practically AWOL for a decade. I guess he just needed some time to cook. In my humble opinion, Nigel Good is the best melodic house producer out there, straight up. His spacey atmospheres, narratively driven projects, and smooth production are practically unmatched. The only thing other producers have on him is that, well, they release a lot more music than Nigel Good does. Nigel Good's A Little Something is all of a finale, sequel, and prequel to his other grand space records. 2014 saw the release of his debut record Nothing Out Here on Silk, now Monster Cat Silk, and then followed that album up just a year later with what I believe to be his magnum opus, Space Cadet. Now, 9 years later, we have been graced with the seemingly final installment of this trilogy of records, as this seemingly acts as the narrative prequel. A Little Something follows a brave astronaut as he prepares for and starts his solitary adventure into deep space. Space Cadet then follows our brave adventurer as they venture into the endless voids of, well, space, only to further land on a new planet to find that there is truly nothing out here. I practically love that Nigel Good plays around with common narrative threads and sonic melodies to keep all 3 records feeling like they are part of one even bigger story to tell. Each of these records has song titles that allude to one another and borrow production elements from one another that really nail home that wherever this adventurer may be on his journey, some things never change. This is far from the flashiest of albums, but Nigel manages to piece together a beautiful soundscape of lush sound design and an adventurous atmosphere. This is some of the best melodic and ambient house production that we'll hear this side of the 2020s. It's hard to express how truly magical this record is. A Little Something, and quite frankly all 3 of Nigel Good's records, are prime examples of the notion that music doesn't need to be crazy and complex for it to be great. This album is profoundly rich in both its narrative and production. The only question I have moving forward is, what's next for Nigel? 2024 might have really been the year of comebacks. Maybe it's because we are just far enough removed from that 2020 plague that gave artists enough time to feel revitalized and eager to make music again, or maybe it's all just a coincidence. But regardless, let's keep them coming. Justice is back and in full force. Dark, brooding electro house, funk instrumentation, and brilliant features. Hyperdrama is easily a new renaissance for this French duo. Collectively, this record is a marvelous, well-planned experience from beginning to end, while allowing most of the tracks to individually shine in their own right. With Justice's last album residing in 2016, and with Daft Punk's retirement in 2021, it almost seemed like French house had seen its glory days and was settling into its own retirement. But Justice broke down the doors of that retirement home, grabbed French house by the neck, and threw it back into the limelight once again. Leaning more into electro territory than explicitly house though, Hyperdrama doesn't rely on its features, but utilizes them better than anything else this year. Tame Impala, The Flints, Miguel, Thundercat, Conan Moccasin, Ramon, each artist that joins the fray of the tracks helps elevate the record into something more than just another Justice LP. In fact, this is actually the first time Justice has had an official feature on a solo album of theirs, and they delivered with each one. Flashes and waves don't try to save me now. Without a doubt though, the biggest tracks to come from this record were the 1-2 combo of Never Ender and One Night All Night, in which Tame Impala joins in for all the fun, resulting in an artist combo that seemed so obviously ripe for success both commercially and sonically. I would argue that their debut, Cross, is still a stronger record holistically, but Hyperdrama is without a doubt the perfect modern Justice record. The mixture of those more commercially grooving tracks with those big features and still more intense, almost underground electro cuts. Justice gives us a little bit of everything, and they didn't disappoint one bit. After all the talk about these iconic producers making their comebacks, I think it's time to get into some debut records. If you're anything like me, there are a couple artists that you love that just never have or seemingly never will put out a full-length album. And honestly, I get it. It's daunting to create what could be a narratively dense and sonically cohesive piece of music that would typically extend anywhere from 30 to 70 minutes in length. Just making a simple song can take months for some artists. I think of artists in my own experience where I was eagerly expectant of hearing a debut project like Tristam, Chime, No Taker, or technically Swedish House Mafia. So when I found out this album was going to be an album, I was over the moon. The long-awaited Glacier debut album is here, and it's simultaneously brand new territory for him, while also keeping things fairly level-headed. While Glacier's entire discography up to this point was a beautiful blending of funky synths, new disco, glitch hop, and nature-esque soundscapes, his tracks would tend to lead more into exclusively EDM territory. This time around though, Glacier has embraced a much more natural tone, opting for more raw instrumentation and less synths. It's an absolutely gorgeous record that should truly be listened to outside in a forest or in a bed of grass. This is one of the best EDM adjacent records of the year. I still quite honestly don't feel fully right about calling this an EDM record, but hey, it's my list and I think the style of indie-tronica, new jazz fusion falls into the umbrella EDM adjacent category, so here we are. I actually had the pleasure of interviewing Glacier the day before this album came out, and I was so thankful to hear his heart for this album and how the whole process felt very natural to him, and it does show. More than anything, I think this album shines as a complete package. The singles and individual tracks are great in their own right, but something about this holistic piece of work makes it feel like a piece of fine art. One single tune here is just a slice of a greater composition where the whole is definitely greater than the sum of its parts. I'm also an absolute sucker for when an artist can make electronic music sound natural and raw. Electronic music is inherently digital. It's in the name. And when a producer can take what's made using ones and zeros and place my headspace in a lush forest or oceanside view, it's pure magic. Glacier's debut record, Here Not Really There, is ultimately a gorgeously produced record that narratively explores the feelings of being physically present but mentally elsewhere, either thinking about mistakes of the past or the desire for a better future. Truly the feeling of being here but not really there. When it comes to the current EDM space of the last 5 years or so, I have felt like there has been a real lack of inherently electronic music. What I mean by that is the core sound of EDM and its subgenres have evolved and changed so much so that we are starting to really stray away from those purely digital and analog sounding records in favor of either a more intense, rigid sound design or something relatively cleaner sounding. But boy, do I love those digital sounds just as much still. No Mana brings forth his sophomore record, I Contain Flashing Images, brimming with top-tier electro house sound design and production. Melding together the classic styles of Deadmau5 with a fresh, energetic twist of his own, I Contain Flashing Images is potentially one of the best electro records ever. The first half of this album is filled with crushing, booming, and hard-driven electro house, only for the back half to have a more straightforward, progressive tinge to it. A little something for everyone. This album is also a testament to the power of branding in music. The glitchy, video game-like minimalistic three-tone on black and white art style is without a shadow of a doubt my favorite look to any piece of music released in the 2020s. It feels uniquely No Mana, while also genuinely heightening my love for all these tracks.
The way it
No Mana has been a staple producer in the electro house space, and quite frankly, one of the few artists that has stayed within these subgenre boundaries for most of their discography, at least always coming back to that electro house foundation. I think it's those years of experience and expertise that solidified No Mana as the modern electro producer. Just seconds shy of hitting the hour mark and at 15 songs in length, this tracklist is chock full of well-crafted, intense, beautiful, dark, even light, well-mixed, and frankly standout tracks. This is one of those albums where once the hour has gone by, you don't really know where it went. I feel so easily intoxicated by the punchy bass lines, creative sound design, and flow of the tracklist. This is peak No Mana. I'm really excited for this next pick because I think it's a sleeper one. This artist is a fairly small one in the grand scheme of things, having 10 times fewer monthly listeners on Spotify than No Mana, and even more than 2,000 times fewer listeners than the upcoming #1 artist we're gonna get to. And that's quite frankly just a shame because he deserves more recognition. Yeah. This album is an absolute masterclass of variety, sound design, and storytelling. Dyatic's debut record will be hard to top with its conceptual narrative and stellar production. One may assume that this is just a heavy-hitting bro step album, but no. There is so much tonal and stylistic variety within this. Whether it's bouncing around drum step, rhythm, drum and bass, glitch hop, or even the odd reggaeton beat, Dyatic manages to keep the holistic tracklist so in sync with itself. There wasn't a moment where anything felt out of place or unnecessary. This is a contender for bass record of the decade. When it comes to the conceptual records that have a very explicit storyline that is told throughout the tracklist, you have to be very careful in how it's presented. Oftentimes, I find that adding a spoken narrative can detract from the individual tracks or even the holistic project. Dyatic's The Third Kind follows this dark narrative of humans discovering and or rediscovering, in this case, an encounter with these watchers, aliens of sorts, a third kind. I more than anything deeply appreciate where these narratives come into play though. Dyatic was quite intentional about what points in the track list he was going to do heavy storytelling, and the points where the music just needed to speak for itself. While I do love the abrasive bro step moments of this record that make up a majority of its track list, I especially resonate with these sonic detours with tracks like Don't Hold Back that tackle a more bass house leaning sound, Body Flicker that's like glitch hop, or Tree of Life leaning more into drum step territory. I very honestly didn't think I was going to love this Dyatic record as much as I did. But ultimately, I thought the storytelling hit all its marks. I love the variety of subgenres, and it's a densely packed record with lots to latch onto. For those of you that have been around this channel for some time and or have been around for enough of these year-end lists, you may know that I'm not the biggest fan of rhythm. It's a more harsh, rigid, and typically minimalistic subgenre of dubstep that just doesn't really gel well with my typical listening habits. So when I tell you that I loved a rhythm album, and it's my number 3 album of all of EDM this year, it's time to pay attention. I believe that we will look back at this album and call it the most influential dubstep record of this decade. This album might single-handedly change the course of rhythm's history. This record is pure musical bliss from start to finish, as it's a dubstep record that wasn't primarily inspired by dubstep itself, separating itself from the pack. By balancing rhythm's harsh melodies with melodic synth runs and punchy vocal chops, SCRAPYARD has secured a spot for themselves among the greats already. Front to back, this record is jam-packed with a variety of tracks that offer a slew of sounds that are primarily danced around that core rhythm style. But more than anything, it is that delicate balance of intense, dense production and the brighter, lighter melodies scattered all throughout. I mentioned it earlier, but I think at the heart of what makes this LP so special is that SCRAPYARD's inspiration for this record primarily came from areas outside of the dubstep and rhythm spaces. Rather than going into a project with the intent to make a rhythm album, SCRAPYARD merely wanted to make a record out of the sounds that inspired who they are and the music that they enjoy. SCRAPYARD's The Weight of the World is seemingly a glamorized or idealized vision of what underground EDM should be like. There is no correct song structure, there is no right choices to be made. This is purely what felt right in the moment. I have no doubt that history will look back fondly upon this project and recognize it for how influential it will be to all these SoundCloud heroes that will eventually make a name for themselves down the line. In the same way many artists today credit Daft Punk as a primary influence on their sound, I think SCRAPYARD is that for the next generation of underground and bass music producers. Well, we are nearing the end of this list, and boy, was figuring out which albums were going to take the top 2 spots a cakewalk, quite frankly. The only question in my mind was which spot would be where, and I've decided on a weird compromise of sorts. This next project is actually my favorite of the year. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense yet, but hear me out. This list is explicitly for the top 10 EDM albums of the year, and while this one may be my personal favorite, I just don't think it was truly the top dog of EDM in 2024. It's not Porter Robinson's Smile is absolutely my favorite project of the year. The only hesitation I have with it being on this list is that it's his least EDM-leaning project to date. Smile is a more indie-tronica and electropop record that takes more inspiration from explicitly indie and rock-like elements than all of his records that came before it. This album perfectly encapsulates Porter's feeling towards fame, the music industry, and most importantly, his fans. The double-edged sword is that he can do whatever he wants and say whatever he wants, and he'll still have a dedicated fan base that needs him. A fan base that Porter actually can't live without as well. It's the core theme of this album, actually. This is without a doubt Porter's most mature and narratively driven project yet. He's proven he's more than just a pretty beat, and in the same breath, he's also proven that he has something worth saying, and you need to pay attention to it. And while Porter still very much has those electronic and bit pop elements all throughout this record that dominate songs like Knock Yourself Out, Cheerleader, and Russian Roulette, it's those more indie and rock-leaning songs like Easier to Love You and Mona Lisa that really captured my heart.
I just want more bass through the door. What's it all for? I'm taking you home.
In true Porter Robinson fashion, this record was another stylistic detour from his established sound of his prior record. His debut Worlds was an EDM masterpiece and almost single-handedly changed the course of electronic dance music for the following 5 to 10 years. Then 2021's Nurture was a fan favorite of synth-pop production blended together with a beautifully natural soundscape. And now, 2024's Smile is a more acoustically driven, poppy exploration of Porter's relationship with his music and his fans.
Knock yourself out. Knock yourself.
Personally, my favorite track of the record has to be the soft ballad that is Easier to Love You, that sees Porter essentially writing a love song to himself, and how he idealizes who he wants to become and is saddened when he feels like he hasn't quite arrived there yet.
Like me.
In fact, this whole back half of the record, the final 4 tracks, are in my opinion Porter's strongest set of closing tracks. And that's really saying something. Easier to Love You, Mona Lisa, Is There Really No Happiness, and Everything to Me close out the album with the perfect tone and narratives that he's been trying to get at this whole time.
You know, Porter, some people die of nostalgia.
Porter Robinson has done it once again, and with now his real 5th significantly different holistic sound. This man is a machine that cannot do wrong.
Don't kill yourself, you idiot.
Before we get into what many of you already know is the #1 pick, I want to quickly highlight some other albums that didn't quite make this list. And this year, I'm gonna do something slightly different by including albums that landed on my personal top 10 albums list, but ones that I wouldn't consider to fall into the umbrella EDM category. So let's do it.
When I was a little boy living in the void, I was never joyed, world destroyed before it began. Never had a man, never had a figure to hold my hand who would understand.
Just don't take it onto heart. Let go and turn the lights out. Thank God.
I'd like you to know that at this point, the #1 pick for this list has been here the whole time. You just may not have known it yet.
I'm just living that life, one that's called classic, but it's still pop. I get money, you get me.
Wow, Bowtied, so original. He's put BRAT as the best album of the year. So unique, so cool. Yeah, well, it's because this truly was the best album, not only in EDM, but the entirety of the music industry in 2024. So much so that if you look at all of the year-end lists by music critics, this record has more than double the score of second best. There literally hasn't been an album as dominant as this since Kendrick Lamar's 2015 To Pimp a Butterfly. It's absurd how incredibly good this record is.
360, when you're in the mirror, do you like what you see? When you're in the mirror, you're just looking at me. I'm everywhere.
To single-handedly define music culture for any period of time is a feat in and of itself. And, well, BRAT defined the entire summer of 2024 with the now iconic sentiment and one you've probably heard a lot, BRAT Summer. So what's so special about this album? Like, really, what is so special about it? Well, it actually has everything going well for it. On the surface level, this record may look like just a catchy dance record with accompanying TikTok dances and the best guerrilla marketing the music industry has ever seen. But if you dive just a little deeper, you'll find that Charli XCX has something really profound to say. From top to bottom, this album can actually be viewed through the lens of an emotionally deep and often distressing narrative as we get a glimpse into the harsh realities of being a pop star. Charli starts the record with tracks like 360 and Club Classics that are quintessential party anthems with lyricism that gets you up and dancing, not giving a care about what people think. You party and you party hard. That's all there is to life.
I wanna dance to me. When I get to the club.
But almost right away, we get a glimpse into the dark side of the industry with Sympathy is a Knife and I Might Say Something Stupid, where Charli very openly talks about wanting to buy a gun in a paranoid panic for either protection for herself or just to end it all. Even further expressing how alcohol has become a vice and her inner turmoil of if she really wants to be here anymore. Then Charli goes on a 4-track bender of just telling it the way that it is. Abundantly transparent about wanting to have a real, genuine conversation with her family, friends, and partner on Talk Talk, the realities of what it takes to be a star on Von Dutch, and wishing that she could all do it again on Rewind.
Sometimes
And in a moment of seemingly divine clarity, Charli stops the show to express her grief for her late friend and fellow musician Sophie on So I, and how Charli felt like she didn't know how to authentically grieve.
No, I can cry, so I cry.
Then hopping back into things with Girl So Confusing and Apple that expressed Charli's desire to be just a normal person, to fight against her beef with Lorde that was seemingly pushed upon the two of them, and the notion that Charli really has nowhere to go if she wants to feel alone.
I think the apple's rotten right to the core from all the things we've done from all the.
And in another moment of clarity, Charli recognizes the person she's become and the persona she's currently taken on and doesn't want to go back to it, with tracks like Back to Back and Mean Girls. The full acknowledgement that the party girl life maybe isn't for her anymore.
back to back to back to back to back to you. I wanna go right back to you.
Which is further expressed on I Think About It All the Time, where Charli again openly expresses her thoughts on becoming a mother, how she's potentially running out of time if she wants to, and the internal struggle of if parenthood is really for her.
I think about it all the time, that I might run out of time, but I finally met.
Then 365 closes us out as 360 ushered us in, turning the whole record into one cyclical album where Charli falls back into the same habits she thought she had shed.
I'm in the club, yeah, I'm 365 party girl. Should we do a little key?
And that is why I love this album so much, and that is why it is undoubtedly the #1 EDM and #1 album of 2024. Within the EDM community specifically, I've seen a lot of people push this record aside, thinking it's some kind of pop-only record or not nearly enough EDM-like for them to really care about. But quite frankly, I think that's an arrogant mindset that doesn't really take an honest look at what this album is truly trying to convey.
Open that.
Whew, that was quite the list, I must say, but I'm curious to hear what you think about any and all of these records. Did BRAT land a spot on your list, or were you a hater? Should Porter Robinson have been #1, or do you think it's a placement that was justified? But with all that being said, I'm Dakota from Bowtied Media, and I'll see you guys in another video.